I'm trying to make an album with under $1,000 worth of gear. In my last episode, I outlined all of the different pieces of equipment that I was going to use for this project. And now we've gotten into the nitty-gritty of actually writing and recording the first demos of these songs. At the end of 2023, I released my debut album, Letters to God, Man and Myself, and this album took a ton of work, a lot of investment, and a lot of exciting pieces of innovation to make come to life. After I released it, I had all of these people asking me questions about how I made this happen with what was obviously a fairly low budget that I had for myself. But I also had a lot of people who were almost assuming that I was in some fancy studio or had been given all of this crazy expensive gear to make this thing happen because they thought, well, that it was impossible to make a record if you didn't have all of this equipment. And so with this project, I'm trying to prove that you don't need all of this fancy stuff to write and create music. You can do something with, well, under $1,000 worth of gear. As I started this second phase of this project, the first thing that I noticed was that it was actually really exciting to have these confined constraints to work within. It was like because I only had these specific pieces of gear, because I had these forced limitations, I had to force myself to be creative with them to create the sounds that I wanted to come across. It's not dissimilar to when I was a kid and playing in a park. You know, my friends and I, we would go to a local park and we would play all sorts of games, whether the game was groundies or tag or hide and seek or maybe wailing on each other with some wooden sticks and pretending that we were knights or Jedi or something like that. But the point of that being was that the park created this constraint. Anything that we did, we had to utilize what the park was. And so our imaginations would flourish within the confines of the park. It feels the same for a project like this. You have these constraints, and because of it, it says, this is what tools you get to use. Now your imagination, your creative ability, your intuition is what leads you to innovate within these confines. This all leads me to a pretty well-defined statement, and it has some nice alliteration that I'm enjoying to use that I've found throughout this project, which is that constraints coerce creativity. Having constraints actually allows us to innovate further, to discover new things that we might not otherwise discover. There were plenty of sounds that I found throughout this second phase of the project that I never would have looked to do otherwise. I would have said, oh, let me just go out and maybe buy a drum sample or find some drum samples that fit what my needs are. Or, oh, do I need this pedal for that? Do I need this synthesizer to make that sound? But when you don't have those options, you actually find these new ways to get the sounds that you're looking for that might even be better than those paid alternatives. But let's not just talk about these different things that I discovered and found through this project. Let me show you them. With this first song for this project, I really wanted to just go 100 miles per hour and just kind of prove everything wrong. I felt that the easy route would be for me to do a very simple singer-songwriter or folk song that's really just rooted in a guitar and vocal foundation. If it didn't need any other instruments, then it wasn't really proof that you could do this project with very little. So I wanted to really challenge myself right off the bat. Now, I had written these lyrics sort of reflecting on a river during November of last year and how this relates to life. And I really liked this idea of writing a song that felt like a river running, that felt like this sort of ebb and flow that you get when you are listening to a river. And I showed some of these different lyrics that I had written in the first episode of this series. So I did the first thing that I usually do when I write a song, which is I took the lyrics that I'd written and I grabbed my acoustic guitar. Now, this was one of the things that I selected to use for this project, and it's probably the biggest spender in terms of the budget of this $1,000 EP. Why? Because I get melody and I get percussion out of it, which I think is really useful for this project. But I also just love the opportunity to sit down and play a guitar and see what comes to life. And I think that's something that you really only get with an instrument that you can feel. I could have gone and tried to do something that's entirely MIDI, or I could have, selected a little keyboard or something, but I just find that having that physical touch really helps me to write and to come up with creative ideas. Now, the first thing that I did for this was I put the guitar in an alternate tuning. I often find that putting guitars in alternate tunings helps me to come up with new and exciting licks and riffs, and it lets me add fullness to songs that I might not otherwise be able to add fullness to. There's a great bit in Jeff Tweedy's book, How to Write One Song, where he talks about retuning a guitar in order to give himself inspiration or to challenge him to write something that he may not otherwise have written. And I really love that idea. So what I actually did was tune this guitar into open D flat, and then I started in on writing this riff. And that riff sounds like this. Now, I knew that I wanted that to be kind of the foundation or the verse of this, but I also knew that I wanted something that was really, really big and chunky to lead into this song and to serve as almost a chorus. I wanted something that I would play on an electric guitar normally. And while I knew that that meant I was going to break some rules in trying to distort the sound of this riff and distort this guitar in post, I decided that was part of the challenge of this project. So I just went for it, and I ended up coming up with this riff to sort of lead into the song. And I really enjoy that riff because I think it really takes advantage of this alternate tuning and some of the open strings that are there. And it almost sounds dirty, even acoustically, but it sounds especially cool after I start putting some distortion on it, like I've done in post. Now, I came up with a third riff that I decided to use for this song, and I really liked the speed of this one, and I really liked the kind of high notes that were used to it. And what I thought was really special about this is that it really felt as though I did move through that kind of ebb and flow that you get from a river running. You have this speed, you have this harshness and power, and then you have this kind of bubbling and peacefulness that you hear from a river. And so that third riff that I use for this song sounds like this. So having these written and kind of chunking them out into a verse, chorus, pre-chorus arrangement really helped me get a kickstart on this song. So then I went back to those lyrics that I had written before, and I took out the ones that I didn't like. I took out the ones that didn't make sense together. I found a concrete narrative and an idea to go with. I adjusted some rhyme schemes. I found what worked best with this melody that I came up with, and I ended up with a pretty fully fledged song. However, as soon as I came into the recording process, I encountered an immediate problem. And that first problem was that I didn't realize I had written some of these riffs in different time signatures. So that opening riff, this heavy one, is in 4/4, which is what I honestly thought that I'd written everything in. Then that third one that I'm using for the pre-chorus, that one that I said sounds like that almost peaceful bubbling water, is also in 4/4. However, I ended up spending a good amount of time trying to figure out what frickin' time signature this second riff was in. Now, it turns out the sound that I really loved about it, that fun little skip almost that it does, is because it's in 5/4 time. And I was left then with a couple of different options. I could either try to shift this riff into 4/4, which I did try to do and I just didn't enjoy it, or I could have a song that changes between time signatures. And that's the option that I ended up going with. While it wasn't intentional, I found that push and pull from the 4/4 to the 5/4 actually added a really fun aspect to this song that contributed to that feeling of the ebb and flow of a river. So I stuck with it and I really enjoyed it, and it's just a happy little accident. Now, the next thing that I wanted to do was to formulate some really cool and exciting drums for this, but I wanted to challenge myself even more. So rather than use like the stock MIDI drums that Logic Pro has, I decided that I wanted to sample every single drum that was used for this song. So on the day that I wrote the song, I actually had my phone out and I recorded a voice memo of this very river running. It sounds like this. And so I ended up sampling that, and I utilized it to make both the cymbals and the hi-hats for this song, which actually sound really, really cool in post, and just was surprisingly easy to do, and was really quite fun and exciting to think that this is a sound that nobody else has, that I got to come up with all by myself. Next, I needed a really strong kick. And I thought this song kind of has a little bit of that folky vibe to it. Why not really lean into that and just record a stomp? There's a lot of those kind of old folk or country songs that have the sound of like boots stomping, or people even just trying to emulate that. So I put on a pair of boots and I recorded a large number of stomps using an SM57 run into the PreSonus interface that I'm using for this project, and just got a ton of samples to work with so that I could figure out what would sound best for this project. And you guys, really, if you don't have one of these, this is probably the most versatile microphone of all time. You can use it for anything. It's $99. If you're trying to get into production and are like, oh, but I need a good mic and I don't have money, you don't need money.
You don't need money.
There's all these people out there who are saying stuff about how you need these really nice microphones that cost like $1,800, or you need that microphone emulator or like all of this software to run it. You don't. You need this. You could make an entire album using just a Shure SM57 and you would be doing just fine. It's good enough for so many people. I guarantee it's good enough for you. And it's so durable. You could huck this thing off a cliff and I'm sure it would survive. So I get this great sounding boot stomp and I use that and I sample it the same way that I did the water for these hi-hats and these cymbals, and I get this piece together. But then there's kind of a B section of the song where I decided that I wanted a different sounding drum. And rather than just adjust the sound of the boot, I decided to continue this escapade of random innovation and once again use my trusty old acoustic guitar. Because like I said, this is just as much a percussion instrument as it is a melodic instrument. So we did two things. The first is we got the sound of a kick. The way that I did that is I just muted the strings and you just hit this with your palm. I recorded that kick just using the direct output of the guitar into the interface because there was a nice bass frequency that comes from inside of here, and that's really where I wanted to capture it. And then next, I wanted to get this almost snare sound where I'm tapping the top. And what's really exciting about an acoustic guitar's body is there is a different sound all across it. So where you tap, you can get a different percussive tone. And you can even adjust it by, putting a flat hand on it or muting it or putting something inside the sound hole. There's so many different ways. And that was, guess what I recorded with? Also recorded with just an SM57 pointed at the body to get all of these different sounds. And then I got this really exciting acoustic thump that carries us through this B section with this more high-end tapping that goes on the outside of it. The next thing that I did on this song was record vocals. And for this, I used a different microphone. This is the Shure PGA 181. It costs like $80. It's a pretty stinking decent microphone for what it costs, and it's just a good condenser, and I like the sound of my voice through a condenser microphone, which is why I chose to go with this. I didn't do anything too fancy or aggressive with the vocal recording. I kind of just wanted to stick to the basics, especially because I'm doing all of these new and odd sounds in other places where I thought it was better not to add too much of something strange or different to a song and to really keep something that was grounded here. However, I am just in the demo phase of this project still. So what's really important to me is to always get my ideas out and then polish them later. I'm the kind of person who can totally get stuck recording and re-recording and doing all of this process to try to get something that sounds absolutely perfect. And what I've learned is if I do that, I never make anything. And I think that's unfortunately the case for a lot of us. We go to record and we want to have that absolutely perfect guitar sound first run through. We want to have that nailed vocal take. And so what we end up doing is we spend, 4 hours on your guitar tone, and then you realize it doesn't actually even sound as good as it did when you flipped your amp on and had your pedals set to some random settings. Or you go to get that perfect vocal take, but you can hear a slight bit of moisture or lack thereof in your throat, and so you keep on going until you can't sing anymore. And by the end of that process, you've lost motivation, or, you can't sing anymore, or the time is gone, and then you never end up putting that song out there because it's not perfect, or because you never were able to get the full idea in your DAW or on the page because you were looking for that absolute perfection. So when it comes to the demo phase of a project for me, my first step is you need to get the whole idea down. My rule is make sure it follows the click so that you can record something else over it and you can re-record it and there's no dissonance there. And obviously try to do a good job. Don't be lazy with it, but it's important that you get that full idea, that you get the song structure printed out and are able to look at it and say, okay, is this idea good? Does it have merit? Because if the idea is good, if the song is structured well, even if you have some crappy parts, you'll realize, oh, this will sound good when I redo that. But if the idea is bad, it doesn't matter how good of a recording you have. It's still not a functional idea. And that's kind of what's exciting about the demo process. I have so many demos that will never go anywhere because by the time I got the demo done, I realized this isn't a decent song. When I was recording my last album, I still remember I sent a lot of the demos to my drummer Kaike, and he kind of told me that a few of them, he was really confused because he was like, these are cool ideas, but the demo does not sound good. It's like bad quality. And then when he came to do our final recording and I had tracked all of the guitar parts well, he was really excited by the stuff that we had. We had this great dialect about how, for me, I need to just get a demo out. And it doesn't matter if it sounds amazing. If I can tell that the whole big picture, that idea is working, then we can know where we're going with it. So when it comes to writing music, you guys, just make the demo. It doesn't have to be perfect. Make a lot of shit music. It's better that you made a ton of mediocre music than you never ever put out or never actually finished a good song. So being in this demo phase, I did some okay vocal takes and I liked the way that they sounded, and I added some cool backing vocal stuff and things that I can follow when I'm in that final polishing phase of recording this project. Now, lastly, I just wanted some exciting sounds in this. I wanted some little pieces of ear candy that carried you through this track. And so for that, I used this guy, which costs like $30. It's just a MIDI controller. This doesn't actually do anything on its own except for trigger things. I just like the physical feel when I'm recording. And I used a few of Logic's stock MIDI instruments and some exciting plugins, which I will outline for you in the next video. So originally I was going to carry this video all the way through from these early steps of recording to the whole production process and to the end, but it turns out that that would be a pretty long video, so I've decided to split it into two. And that next video is going to be a lot more of digging into the recording process and the production process and kind of patching together this demo in your DAW. But for this video, I wanted to lean a lot more into this idea of constraints. Because since the purpose of this series is to encourage you and anyone who watches this to make music, I want to remove the fear of constraints and actually encourage you to create them. Constraints can give us an intense freedom. When I recorded our first album, we were in a cabin and we had this set of gear that granted was more than I'm using on this album, but still was a finite set of equipment. And we could have given up on certain things saying, oh, we just don't have what we need to capture this sound. We don't have the right gear. But instead it was, how can we use our space and how can we use our equipment to get the sounds that we want? And there's a freedom in that because it says the solution is there. You just have to find it. The solution is not in your bank account. The solution is not in a trip to the music store. The solution is in finding the path to your goal. So if you're making music and you feel like you're hearing this discourse that says that you just need a new piece of gear, you need all of the right stuff to make it, I would encourage you to just start making music. If you have the means and you find gear that inspires you and makes the process easier, please go and get the gear. But that's not what lets you make stuff. What lets you make stuff is the desire to do so and the willingness to go forward and find a way. In the next video, I'm going to dig into all of the ways that I produced this first song throughout the whole production process, start to finish, and I will show you the first demo of this track. If you've enjoyed this series so far, I would encourage you to please like and subscribe, or you can support me by checking out my music anywhere that you listen to music. Additionally, this series has a lot of exciting things accessible to Patreon patrons. So if you support on Patreon, you will get things like all of the different samples that I create and use throughout this project. You'll get downloadables of all the tracks, and you'll get things like tabs, chord charts, lyric charts, and an inside look into how I go about the writing process. Lastly, I really want to support other independent musicians throughout this project. So if you're an independent musician and you have music that's out there, I want you to send it to me at this email address, and it might get put into one of these videos. This is not a paid thing. I'm not going to ask you to give me money for your feature. If I like your song, I'll feature some of your song in one of the upcoming videos towards the end, as just an homage to other independent musicians who are out there trying to do this, because it's an amazing accomplishment to make music and to put it out there, and there's so much to discover. So please send your music here if you want to get featured in a future video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this series. You can check out the next episode on the Ragged Oak YouTube channel.